Hello guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Unique Items. Today we're going to be going over a very odd item called Craze of the Dead God. Craze of the Dead God is either probably one of the worst uniques you've ever seen, or one of the best uniques you've ever seen, depending on who you talk to and what build you're setting it up for. Let's go over the item itself first, then we're going to talk about like the nitty gritty. We're going to get into like what I think about the item, how the item could potentially function for your build, like what builds it works with, etc. And there's a lot to talk about. So first off, it does have a 7 to 8% critical strike chance, which is specifically designed around the Noxious Resonance key passive, because of course critical strike chance doesn't do anything for poison abilities if you are doing poisoning, right? So having critical strike chance is specifically for the Noxious Resonance key passive when it comes to poison. It also has 2 to 3 to Touch of Death ability, because this is built around the Touch of Death ability. Which is, of course, the ability that infects monsters and then causes them to have like little egg monster babies come out of their chest, and then they like swarm around and start poisoning everything. It's like, think aliens. And having more bonus ranks to Touch of Death is nice, but this is not necessarily something that you couldn't get otherwise. If you set this up as a core skill, for instance, you could go with +3 core skills on a glove, and that would work just fine. Something in my throat. It also gives you +3 to nourishment, or +2 to nourishment, rather, with a 3 on the greater affix. And nourishment is going to give you a rather large amount of healing bonus, as well as a multiplier for healing yourself, which is up to, I think it's 9% for the +3 on the greater affix, and you get a 20% increase in your healing. Let me just go ahead and grab some points here. So as you can see, the 20% doesn't go up, but you do get an additional 3% multiplier for every point you put into nourishment. Then it also comes with anti-venom, and anti-venom is kind of exactly what you want with these gloves, because they're going to be poisoning you. It has 2 anti-venom, and you could potentially get up to 3 if you had a greater affix. And every point in anti-venom is going to increase your poison resistance, and it's also going to increase your maximum poison resistance. And so once you have enough points in here, like for instance, if you put 3 in and you also get an additional 3, you're going to be at what, +18% max, and the highest you can go, I believe, is 15. So you're going to be capped at 85%, which is going to be the highest that you can go for anti-venom. Now all of that is really just the opening act. The main effect on this particular item is when you would take direct damage, it is instead distributed as poisoning over the next 10 seconds, but increased by, and of course it has a variable of 30 to 0%. You want the 0. You definitely want the 0. So what does this mean? This means that if you have an attack that comes in and dishes out damage to you, like say for instance I currently have, you can see I have 4,689 life because I'm missing, 2 of my high HP items. But let's say I have like a 5,000 HP, right? And a monster comes in and hits me for 20,000 damage, right? Well, 20,000 is a lot of damage, but we're going to divide that over 10 seconds. And we're probably also going to divide that in half, because it's probably going to be like a tick rate of like 1 a tick every like 0.5 seconds. So let's divide that by 2. So we're going to have about 1,000 damage ticking on us like every 0.5 seconds over the next 10 seconds up to the 20,000, right? So in this way, as you can clearly see, I don't have enough HP to take 20,000 damage hit, but I could potentially survive this because it's going to distribute that damage over a duration, which is going to make it easier for me to survive. The main mechanic of this, though, is that you want to be poisoned for the special effect. The special effect is Lucky Hit. Direct damage has up to a 25% chance based on your poison life percentage to infect an enemy with Touch of Death. Now, this is kind of wonky because it is affected by a lot of things that would potentially prevent this from working properly. First off, you have to be hit. All right, if you're not hit, then you're not going to be poisoned, and if you're not poisoned, you get nothing. It does go down to 0. Like if you're wearing these and you don't have any poisoning on your character, like just as an example, let me go ahead and disable the physical attacks. If you don't have any poisoning on your character and you're attacking the target with the Craze of the Dead God on, they will never become infected. Which basically means that you have to be hit to cause this thing to actually be activated, or you have to be poisoned in some way. And when you're hit, you can clearly see this, like when I get smacked by the effect, I will get poisoned. And you can see that my HP is now poisoned. But one of the things that I've noticed is that not only do you have to get hit, but things can cancel out the poisoning effect as well. You can also potentially die from the poisoning effect, which is also a rather bad negative. But most of the time that doesn't happen, simply because if you're attacking at a fast enough rate, you'll be healing yourself, you'll be dishing out enough damage that you won't have to worry about it, and you can, in general, prevent the poisoning from ever occurring on your character. Like, say, for instance, I was utilizing, as an example, let's say I was utilizing Andariel's Visage, which is a pretty nice helmet that has life on hit. In this particular case, if I'm utilizing Andariel's Visage and I'm attacking the target, I'm going to pretty much just remove the poison immediately, as soon as it's applied to my character. So it's not even going to be a matter of, like, am I poisoned? Because the poison's going to be gone instantaneously. Also, if you dodge the attacks, like, for instance, if you're set up for a high dodge percentage, or if you are moving really quickly and you just don't seem to get hit a lot, which the rushing claw builds tend to not get hit because they're just, like, bouncing all over the screen for the most part, it becomes very difficult to actually gain the poison effect, and if you don't have the poison effect, the infections don't work. The infections work even if you don't have Touch of Death on your bar, so this is also something interesting. So if you're utilizing this pair of gloves and you are attacking, you can get the infections to happen, as you can see. I'll see if they actually... It might be the Andariel's Visage. Hold on. Do I even have them on? I don't have them on, of course. Put them on, dang it. There we go. It takes a second, because of course I have to get hit to apply the poisoning to me and make sure that he's set up to actually hit me, because he didn't seem like he was hitting. As you can see, it's not exactly easy to be hit and to be poisoned to cause the lucky hit to actually proc. And not only that, but a lot of the times, even if you do get hit and cause the poison to actually affect you, you immediately cure the poison by healing or casting barrier on yourself, which doesn't make the process any easier. However, if I can get this to work, I can show you that the Craze of the Dead God does in fact infect the monster. There you go, it finally worked. Even if you don't have Touch of Death on your bar, which is what we currently have going on here, and then after 9 seconds you see that it comes off. Now, functionally, the Craze of the Dead God gloves don't actually work very well unless you're using Noxious Resonance. And I'll go over this very quickly. So, applying an infection to a monster requires that the infection lasts for either 9 seconds or the monster dies. If you're fighting a boss, you can only affect the monster once every 9 seconds, which means that you're not going to get a particularly large amount of damage out of potentially infecting the monster multiple times, because you can't. So if you're fighting an elite, or if you're fighting like a really strong, boss, or like like the Butcher shows up or something like that, and they're the only monsters around, these gloves basically do nothing in those situations, unless you're using Noxious Resonance. Now, the infection, when the infection ends, is when it spawns, and when the little thing spawns, that's when you get the damage. There are a couple aspects that you can utilize to take advantage of the multiple infections. And let's take a look at those real quick on the aspect panel, because they are important to talk about. So the one in particular that you definitely want to use with this particular one is the Insatiable aspect. This is kills extend the duration of your active touch of swarms, which doesn't matter, by 0.2 seconds. And then the important part is when a swarm is replaced early, it bursts for 300% of the damage that it would have done. And the reason why this is important is that with the Craze of the Dead God, you are going to be infecting like everything around you. These infections are, of course, going to spawn a swarm. You can only have a maximum of 3 swarms. And every single time you spawn a new swarm, one of the old swarms is going to explode and dish out a rather large amount of damage that it would have done in that time frame. This requires that the monster either A, dies, B, that the timer runs out of the full 9 seconds of the infection, or C, you pull the infection off in some way. So the infection is technically poison damage. And you can pull off poison damage from a target by utilizing the key passive known as Noxious Resonance. So these gloves really only work with a Noxious Resonance build because the Noxious Resonance ability is going to pull that off of there. It's going to pull the infection off, and it's going to allow you to spawn the swarm faster. This is the only way that you can really take advantage of the way that the gloves function. By utilizing the Noxious Resonance key passive. So let's do an example here, and I'm going to show you what I mean by this. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the Touch of Death on here, and we're going to disable the attacks for a second. So for instance, if I attack the monster with Touch of Death, I have to wait 9 seconds, and at 9 seconds I will get myself a swarm. This is a rather tedious process, but I do get a swarm every 9 seconds as long as the monster stays infected for the full duration. If they die early, then I get the swarm early, but also I could potentially pull the infection off by using Noxious Resonance. So we're going to pull the infection off using Noxious Resonance, and I'm going to show you how it actually activates sooner. So as you can see, I put the Touch of Death on the target, and as soon as I put the Touch of Death on the target, I immediately crit the target with Noxious Resonance, which caused the swarm to activate early. So the way that these particular gloves work is they're designed around the idea of using Noxious Resonance. I don't really think they work unless you are using Noxious Resonance. And in the general gist of how these function, if I were to pull up multiple training dummies and grab physical damage so that they're hitting me, I'm going to essentially just focus on dishing out as much damage as I can. And in the process, I'm going to apply crits. I'm going to get hits, I'm going to dish out these infections, and I'm going to very quickly gather in more and more of these swarms. And the general gist of the idea is that you're forcing the infections to leave the target quicker, which causes the swarms to spawn faster, which then, of course, gives you more explosions and leads into massive amounts of damage, right? But it has to be used with Noxious Fist or Noxious Resonance, otherwise you're not going to get the swarms. And if you don't get the swarms, then you're not going to get the additional damage. You also have to use the aspect where they explode early. They explode if you summon one while you still have a full pack. So the goal of this is to get as many swarms as you possibly can, obviously 3 swarms, and then spawn more swarms, which are then going to obviously explode and dish out massive amounts of damage. Craze of the Dead God just simply allows you to infect the target more times. That's really all there is to it. You're just going to be infecting the target, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times. In fact, you ideally, with the way that this works, you want to infect the target every single time that you attack, and also crit every single time you attack, pulling the infection so that the next time you attack, you are pulling another infection, and so forth and so on. So that you're literally infection, crit, infection, crit, infection, crit, infection, crit. That way you're getting the swarms to pop and explode at a very fast rate, which gives you a rather large amount of damage. Now, if you're not using Noxious Resonance, the gloves are basically garbage. Like, I don't really know how to explain it other than that. If you don't pull the infection early, you're basically getting like no additional damage, and about the only usefulness they might have is when you're like fighting a bunch of trash mobs and you can infect all the trash mobs at once with like a big attack, and then you still have to wait 9 seconds for all of those swarms to spawn and dish out damage. And you could probably do that in the same amount of time with just using like Noxious Resonance, or sorry, with using Touch of Death as a core skill or something like that. Like, it wouldn't even really be that difficult to set up the ability to, infect like an entire pack like that. It really only works with Noxious Resonance. The other thing about these is that a lot of the times, as I said earlier, you just don't end up poisoned, or you heal the poison off too quickly, and you're not actually getting the effect. Because it's a percentage based lucky hit of 25% based on the amount of life that you have poisoned, it often means that you have basically nothing in terms of lucky hit bonus. If you take 25% and you divide that by 100, you get 0.25% per 1% of your HP poisoned. Which means that even if you're like 50% poisoned, like if we multiply this by 50, you only have a lucky hit bonus of 12.5%. If you're even lower than that, like for instance, if you're only like 10% poisoned, that's only going to get you like a 2.5% lucky hit to get the infections. In fact, to get the full bonus of this item, you have to be poisoned basically all the time, and it just doesn't happen. There's too many builds that are set up with high dodge chance, set up with, like bouncing around the map, tons of barrier, healing, and all sorts of other things that just clear the poisons off you almost instantaneously, and then you are left with no poison. And no poison means no lucky hit, and no lucky hit means that they're basically just garbage gloves at that point. Without the unique effect that's on these gloves, they're basically just crappy legendary gloves with no aspect, and they're competing with an aspect that could potentially be doing more damage. You really have to get in there, and you really have to be hit. And let me kind of outline essentially how like bad this is in terms of the Spiritborn. So let's go over the various ways that you could be shooting yourself in the foot by using Craze of the Dead God. So first off is Revealing, which Revealing is a board that specifically gives you the ability to knock down targets. And of course, I'm not using Revealing on this particular character. But Revealing gives you I think it's up to a 30% lucky hit chance to knock down enemies that are vulnerable. So if you knock down an enemy, they're not hitting you, right? And if they're not hitting you, then obviously you're not going to get any poison damage. Concussive Stomp knocks down enemies, and Concussive Stomp is a pretty common one to utilize for like free guerrilla skills with unyielding hits. Again, if you knock them down, they're not hitting you. Counterattack, likewise, gives you a 10% dodge chance automatically, and whenever you activate it, dodges all direct attacks for 3 seconds, up to 6 seconds per cast. Which means that, again, you're now dodging all the attacks, which means you're not taking any damage. And because you're not taking any damage, you're not getting poisoned. And because you're not getting poisoned, you're not getting the effect. Even further is something like Scourge. Scourge fears all the enemies and makes them run away from you. Again, monsters that are feared and are running away from you are not going to hit you, and so you're not going to get any poison damage on your bar. And this is actually really frustrating because Scourge is a very good poison ability, and you would probably want to include Scourge into a poison build. But if you use Craze of the Dead God, you do not want to include Scourge into the poison build because it will prevent you from getting hit, which prevents you from infecting monsters, which is going to, of course, prevent you from getting the effect of the gloves. And I could go on and on and on for a while. Rushing Claw is a mobility skill that makes you like bounce around the map like crazy. And I recently made a very powerful Rushing Claw build using Toxic Skin. And the funny thing is that I tried to use the Craze of the Dead God with this particular build, and the answer to the question was it sucked because I wasn't getting hit and I wasn't getting poisoned, and because I wasn't getting poisoned, I wasn't applying the effect of the gloves, so they were basically just wasted with this particular build. And there's tons of different things on the Spiritborn, like the Dominant, which knocks down enemies. The Scourge, which fears them. The Counterattack, which makes you dodge all the attacks. The Adaptable Concussive Stomp, which has you dodge the next 3 direct attacks from the monster. The list goes on and on and on this particular character, on the Spiritborn, where it seems like what they need to do is perhaps have some kind of like, I don't know, maybe like a little buff on your bar. Something that says like, like has been poisoned. Like they could change this line to say, like direct damage has up to a 25% chance based on your poison life percentage in the last 5 seconds or something. And then have like a little buff that pops up on your bar and says like, you know, like 100% life poisoned, you know, like 5 seconds, and then has like a little countdown. But instead, because it's relying on obviously your direct like amount of poisoning for that particular second, it's very difficult. Um, and more often than not, they just become useless. You know, it's basically a wasted slot on your bar. A lot of the builds that are utilizing these are basically just touch of death builds that are not using Noxious Resonance, and you're spamming Noxious Resonance, obviously. So you have very high crit chance, and you're getting in there and you're trying to get hit as much as you possibly can. There's a lot of things, like I was talking about earlier, that you have to avoid when you set up a build like this if you want to utilize Craze of the Dead God, because if you're utilizing things like counterattack, if you're utilizing things like Scourge, if you're utilizing high dodge percentage and all that other stuff, you're just going to shoot yourself in the foot with these, and you'd be better off utilizing something else. Where do you find these? So if you want to find these particular gloves, you can head over to Diablo 4.life. We got a little target farming uniques. And as you can see, you just click on Spiritborn, and then you click on a Craze of the Dead God, and you'll see that they come from Echo of Varshan. You can also potentially just gamble them, which is also a thing. If you're trying to get these and you're looking for specific stats on these, like you want to know like what's the best stat to get, I would probably rank them Touch of Death first for like the greater affix, then Nourishment, then Anti-Venom, and then probably Crit Chance last. Mainly because you can get crit chance on like everything these days, and having a GA on the crit chance isn't like the most important thing in the world. Touch of Death is going to directly increase the damage output of the ability, and Nourishment also directly increases the damage output of essentially all of the poison that you have, whereas Anti-Venom is going to help you stay alive while you're poisoned, which is also very nice. It's not necessarily the poison resistance on Anti-Venom, but the maximum poison resistance, which is also very important. I also strongly recommend that if you are going to plan on trying to use these gloves, that you also utilize the insatiable aspect, which is probably the most important part of these gloves. In fact, I can't really think of any reason why you wouldn't utilize these with it, since they're entirely designed around replacing the swarms as fast as possible. I mean, if you don't have the explosion, like for replacing the swarms, then replacing the swarms as fast as possible doesn't really do you anything, because they do cap out at 3, and you're going to cap out at 3 really fast. In fact, just using the Touch of Death ability, you usually cap out at 3 with no problem whatsoever. You don't even actually need these gloves to keep the Touch of Death ability going. In fact, the insatiable aspect itself gives you a duration increase as well. So if you're utilizing the insatiable aspect, you're going to have 3 swarms up no matter what. These are just going to allow you to replace your swarms faster, which is going to give you more explosions, which is exactly what you want. You may even want to take the insatiable aspect if you're utilizing this setup and put it on either an amulet or a weapon, because you're going to get the most out of it by causing the swarms to explode for larger amounts of damage, which is definitely going to be good if you're taking advantage of this particular item. I think that's pretty much it for the Craze of the Dead God. I would like to hear you guys talk about this item. Do you think it's good? Do you think it's bad? Do you think it needs a little bit of an adjustment so that the lucky hit chance actually has a chance to proc when you're not poisoned? Maybe the buff idea that I came up with, or maybe another idea that you have in your head. It does have some flavor text that we'll read before we hop off here, and that is, Ta'an seized a spear and drove it thrice into his mad brother Tan. Alas, the craftier of the twin gods wove one last cunning snare. In place of blood, the wound wept venom and consumed all in its wake. As always, I do appreciate you guys and gals joining me for these fun videos, and be sure to hit that like button and the subscribe button and keep watching.